All right, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, it's been nice to be connected with you online on social media, and then to have a chance to talk through Zoom today.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah. So I'm excited to talk about mental health and mental health in the church. That's something that we're both passionate about. But before we dive into that, uh, please share with listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, my name is Chris Morris. I've been a mental health advocate in the church for probably coming up on a decade now.
Hmm.
I just really have a passion for kind of, connecting the dots that seem to not get connected between faith and mental health, because so often there are a lot of barriers around being able to have productive conversations around mental health in the context of the church. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. Um, I do a little bit of speaking, a bit of writing, a lot of kind of mini blog posts and reels on Instagram. Um, all sort of revolving around those ideas. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. So how did you get interested in raising awareness for mental health?
So it's a super personal thing for me. I've struggled with major depressive disorder my entire adult life.
Hmm.
And I've and when I was younger, we were in churches that were, gosh, just not supportive of me trying to find the help that I needed.
Hmm.
They were equating, so they would equate my depression with sin, or they would equate my depression with not having enough faith in God. And I didn't know any better. So I
Hmm.
accepted these things into my mind and into my spirit, and it messed with me.
Hmm.
So a
Did it
number of
make it
years,
worse?
definitely,
Hmm.
definitely, because then there's, you know, so that sort of started me down the path of having a lot of anxiety in my life, to be
Mm.
honest with you. So I
Depression
got
and anxiety.
Yeah, so I got anxious about having depression
Oh.
because my pastors were telling me that there was something wrong with me. And
Mm.
that was the reason that I had depression in the first place. So it sort of
Yes.
escalated things for me.
Right.
And and like I said, I didn't know any better, so I just accepted these things carte blanche.
Mm. Hmm. And would they say that type of thing from the pulpit, or as they're like sitting down with you one on one to like try to encourage you or care for you?
So it was a little bit of both. The primary church we were in for a lot of years was very charismatic leaning. Not to denigrate the charismatic movement in any way, but they were
Mm.
very charismatic leaning. So there
Mm.
was a lot of emphasis on, God is moving and active and able to heal, and He could heal you right now. So the pastor would say something like, for those of you who are struggling with depression, just cling tight to Jesus and you'll be healed, and it's that simple.
Mm.
And then I'm like, why isn't it working? It's not that simple.
Right. Yes. So yeah, if God can heal you of depression and you're not experiencing that, then it must be you.
Right. That's
Yeah.
it. And so then I would circle back to the pastor and say, hey, this was sort of my experience.
Mm.
You know, I I laid myself before the cross, so to speak, and
Hmm.
nothing happened. What's
Mm.
the deal? And
Yeah.
that's when he would say, well, the deal is you. You must have some unconfessed patterns of sin in your life. So
Mm.
let's talk about that. What are the patterns of sin that you have in your life? And I'm like, so I was flabbergasted because he pushed all the weight of my mental illness upon me.
Mm. Yes.
And there's very much a kind of anti-medication for this sort of
Mm.
treatment,
Hmm.
anti-medication, and even anti-counseling, other than biblical counseling, quote unquote, where someone
Mm.
throws scripture at you.
Mm.
So it was, probably the first, my 20s were rough because we were sitting at my wife and I we were sitting under this teaching, and then we came out from it and realized, oh my gosh, all this stuff that we've been taught
Mm.
is not only is it wrong, but it's unhealthy and it's tearing us down. So I
Yeah.
began to have conversations with, in my new church, and I began to have conversations with other people and realize, man, a lot of people really suffer and struggle under this exact kind of teaching. And
Mm.
that's what made me passionate about trying to, again, like I said, bridge that gap between some of the misconceptions between faith and mental health.
Great. Yes. Um, so early 20s, this was really tough, and early on in marriage. How did your depression and anxiety affect your home, your relationship?
Oh man, it was, I mean, the short answer is it was rough. You know, I expressed a lot of my self-hatred because
Mm.
that's really what it sort of congealed into, was this self-hatred that there's something wrong with me. Why
Mm.
can't I fix myself? So I began to express some of that self-hatred in, not in any kind of physical abuse, but certainly raising my voice. I'm 6'7". You can't tell because I'm sitting down. I'm extremely tall.
You're a big
So
guy.
I raise, yeah. So I raise my voice and I get a little agitated. It's a really intimidating thing.
Oh, sure.
So so I would end up intimidating my family in some really unfortunate ways. And
Mm.
there were conversations that my wife just felt like, hey, we're never going to have this conversation on this topic because you're
Mm.
not going to be able to hear it. It's not
Mm.
going to be fruitful, and I'm just going to just stuff it.
Mm.
So it created a bit of resentment on her part that there was all this stuff that we couldn't
Mm.
unpack.
Yeah. She didn't uh she didn't feel safe to talk about what you guys needed to talk about.
Of course not.
You
Yeah,
couldn't handle it.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what are so changing churches seem to help. What were some other things that helped with your depression and anxiety, Chris?
Um, the things that you would anticipate that would be helpful. I found myself on a good medication regimen. That was the biggest thing, because I'm not okay off meds. It took a while to find the right meds because I have treatment resistant depression as well.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I um, and we ended up going down the path of ECT treatments, electroconvulsive treatments. I
Mm.
did that for about 4 months,
Mm.
and that sort of helped to reset the wiring in my brain.
Mm.
Um, at, at the same time, I found a counselor who, was able to help me sort of work through these apparent contradictions between faith and mental health.
Mm.
And and I made a decision inside myself, which I still struggle with sometimes, just to be more vulnerable, to lead with telling my story and to lead with, hey, even saying to my wife, hey, I'm really struggling with this right now. I'm
Mm.
really down right now and I could use some support.
Mm.
And just opening up the door to those conversations that was creating a lot of resistance in the past.
Yeah. It 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 can be really tough, even though you've been doing this for a decade or more. So thank you again, Chris, for coming on and telling your story.
Yeah.
Yeah. The uh, can you say a little bit more about ECT treatment, and because a lot of folks, they've seen the Hollywood depiction of it, or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and other shows. Um, what was that like for you?
So you're right. There is this Hollywood depiction of like the person being zapped and literally like flailing all about, and being conscious and being aware of what's happening and
Mm.
screaming and all of these wild things.
It's
Like
like torture. Yeah,
right.
looks
That's how it's
terrible.
depicted.
Yeah.
And my experience, the number one thing I would say is there was an anesthesiologist involved. So my experience looked a lot like this. all right, Chris, we're gonna put the meds in you to put you to sleep, and then I'm gonna count backwards from five, five, four. I never made it to two,
Mhm.
and then I would wake up sometime later, sitting in the recovery room,
Mhm.
and I never had any. I was never aware of anything that was happening during the ECT treatments.
Mhm.
Um, the I was usually tired the rest of the day after it happened. But I
Mhm.
think, to be honest, part of that, this is going to sound ridiculous. Like, they did the ECT treatment starting at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I'd
Oh,
have to get up at like 4 o'clock
to
to get
get
to the
there?
hospital.
Yeah. Oh
And
man.
and, and me and mornings don't get along, so it could have
Okay.
been, it could have nothing to do with the ECT treatments, and just be that I was up so darn early.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah.
And then I slowly noticed over the course of doing the ECT treatments, we started doing them. At first, it was 3 times a week, and then we started to spread them out slowly.
Hmm.
And I noticed that I had just a better ability to manage the thoughts that would come my way. Because what happens with me with my depression is I'll have a single thought that I'll hold on to for just a moment too long. And then it's like 1,000 thoughts start piling on top of that single thought.
Mm.
And and I lose control of my ability to manage my thoughts, and I just fall into a pit of depression.
Yeah. You just
So
get
what
overwhelmed by all these thoughts. And
Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
yeah. And,
Yeah.
and what I noticed with the ECT is that it extended the moments between when that first thought would come and when the thoughts would begin to pile on, and it gave me the ability to sort of capture those thoughts and interact with them and accept them or reject them.
Mm. Hmm. And use like the different techniques that you learned with counseling,
Right.
and it gives you a chance uh, to
Exactly.
to before things just steamroll you. Um, so I like what you said. What happens to me with depression? Because depression can look different for folks, and folks can experience it different ways. But the is it were they negative thoughts too, or is it just overwhelmed with the speed
Yeah, it was
and
it
how
was
much of it?
definitely it was definitely negative thoughts. Just, I have a bit of a trauma background in my childhood, so it would be the the in the voice of my father, sort of all these berating thoughts. You're worthless. You're never going to amount to anything. Look at all the mistakes you've made. Oh my gosh, you're on disability. You can't even hold down a job. What a piece of crap you are. All these things would just start coming at me and scream at me, and I just couldn't
Mhm.
deal.
Yeah, yeah, and that just shaming and painful thoughts. So the treatment resistant depression. Uh, so can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we went through, let me think. With my psychiatrist, we went through 5 different sets of meds,
Mm.
and we tried some ketamine therapy as well, and nothing would quote take the edge off.
Mm.
Um, I actually have 2 suicide attempts in my past,
Mm.
um, as evidence of the fact that nothing was giving me kind of an advantage against the depression.
Mhm.
And it was
Yeah.
really because of the failed meds. And even though I was in counseling, it was sometimes helping, sometimes not. And even with the choices to be more vulnerable in conversations with
Hmm.
my wife and others, I still felt like I couldn't get a foothold or a toehold on the
Mm.
battle against my depression.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, it's working so hard, but just not feeling like you're making progress, and just struggling so much. Um, the uh, but was it the ECT that kind of really kind of helped you get on top of it and made the biggest difference?
It I feel like that was where things, so there, that was one of two things.
Okay.
The ECT treatment definitely was, I think that slowed down the dogpiling that I felt like happened.
Mm,
And then after my second suicide attempt, I had some really hard conversations that I probably should have had after the first suicide attempt, but didn't,
mm,
with my wife and with my kids and with my mom and with my mother-in-law and with my close friends. And
mm,
I think it finally clicked for me, in a like a core way, in the deepest part of my soul, that's, hey, you have value to these people and you're going to be missed if you do this again. And not only that, every time you do have a suicide attempt, you bring incredible harm to every relationship that matters to you in your life. And it's not, I realize that my life is built into a community of people that are really important to me and that I'm really important to. And I guess I didn't understand that somehow.
mm,
That was missing in the way that I viewed my life.
mm,
And because of these conversations that I had and all the encouragement that I got and all of the real honest conversations around how painful my decision was, it changed something in the core of me that hadn't changed before, where it's like walking that path down a suicide attempt isn't an option I can take anymore. It's not something that's available to me, and I didn't feel that way in the past.
yeah. So talking with your friends and family, you really started to see and believe that you're important to them, that you're you're absolutely worthwhile
Yes,
and significant.
I
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. Wow. The that must have been scary for your family. Did you have to do any like inpatient treatment or outpatient treatment
Yeah,
after those attempts?
in with the first attempt, I was in an outpatient facility for, I think it was 5 days, and then the
Hmm.
second one I was in for 9 days.
Hmm.
And that was when it was while I was in the second time that they initiated the ECT treatment.
Okay. Mm. Hmm. Yeah. The um, I. You're being so generous with your experience, Chris. I don't want to press too much. Um, but if you feel comfortable answering this, what was like the outpatient treatment like because I know like there might be listeners who are just feel so like just overwhelmed um and but the idea of like getting admitted is like maybe super scary, or they would just feel like um like a failure or shamed. But would you mind sharing a little bit about what it was like to have the
I, I'd be
outpatient
ha-
treatment?
I'd be happy to. It was inpatient treatment both
Or
times.
okay, inpatient. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Sorry, I may have misspoken before. I apologize.
Okay.
I Both times I definitely, I my experience was I came to, the second time I came to after I had tried to OD on some of my meds, and I came to in the inpatient ward.
Oh man. Yeah.
So
Did
my
your wife had to like call 911 and get an
yes,
ambulance and
yeah, yeah. My
yeah.
wife called 911,
Oh man.
and the ambulance came and got me.
Hmm.
And then I came to in the inpatient facility. So
Hmm.
my initial experience was very much one of confusion, like, where the
Hmm.
heck am I? Why, and I was still very fuzzy headed, so I didn't even remember initially that I had an attempt on my life.
Oh, you're like confused about like why you're even there.
Yeah, like, where am I and why am I here and what's going on? And shortly after, there was a recognition in the ward that I was conscious. I had a conversation with the head nurse, And
Hmm.
she's like, "Do you know why you're here?" I'm like, "No, I have no idea." "Do you know where you are?" "I have no idea." And
Hmm.
she very kindly, very generously explained, "Hey, you're on the inpatient ward of thus and so hospital in the mental health care facility because you had an attempt on your life.
Hmm.
Your wife called 911 and we transported you here. We're going to get you stable and
Hmm.
we're going to figure out how to help you and get you back on the right track in your life."
Wow.
Um, from from there, it was, there's things that are very just different. Like you can't have, I couldn't have any shoelaces or couldn't have any drawstrings on my shorts because they didn't want me to have another attempt with the drawstring or the shoelaces. And that,
Hmm.
even that simple thing really brought into like stark reality. Wow, I really am a huge risk to myself.
Hmm.
And I had to come to grips with that.
Hmm.
Um, and then there were, my days were fairly full with different group counseling or individual counseling or, uh, recreational activities or almost seminars or teaching us different techniques to sort of strengthen our mental wherewithal.
Hmm.
Um, the times that were hard were the evenings because there was nothing scheduled, and then
So you're
there'd be
alone with your thoughts and
yeah.
off on your own.
I'm alone with my thoughts, and there's a TV that I could watch whatever everyone else decides they want to watch on TV, or I can go into a room and read or sort of settle with my thoughts. And that was hard, but it was also really good because it forced me. I mean, you understand how distracted life can get when you're just living your normal life. You
Hmm.
know, grab your phone, hop on Facebook, look on Twitter. Your friend texts you, you respond to the text, and then before you know it, 90 minutes has gone by, and you're like, "What did I just do? Oh my gosh, I'm hungry. I need to go eat dinner. What happened?"
Hmm.
And that whole cycle was broken for me, which was really important because it forced me to begin to deal, first on my own and within myself around to deal with how unsafe I was and how dangerous my thoughts had become and what I needed to do to improve.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. The it in all this, or especially in the second attempt, and then the ECT treatment. w- Uh, is there any sense of God uh, in this while you're going through this? Uh, what was going on with your faith and your relationship with God at that time?
That's a really great question. Thank you for asking that.
Mm.
So, at first I was trying to avoid that because I had so much shame and I had so much guilt over, having another attempt on my life. I didn't even learn the first time not to do it, and here we are again.
Oh
So
man.
I felt so much. I was almost overwhelmed by that. My
Mm.
pastor came to visit me, and I'll never forget. He looked at me and he said, "Chris, we need you. Our church needs you. The church isn't whole without you as a part of it, and
Oh.
God's not done with you."
Mm.
And though those few words sort of sparked a personal revival, if you will,
Mm.
where I began to understand that God wasn't, like my pastor Marty said, God wasn't done with me.
Mm.
He hadn't discarded me because I was damaged goods. And I began to cry out to him and I'm not really a guy who prays a lot because I'm ADHD. So that's really
Oh.
hard for me
Yeah. Uh-huh.
to focus.
Hmm.
Like just practically, I'm the king of really short prayers for the most part.
Uh-huh.
But when I was, in my room by myself with nothing else to do, I found myself, just pleading with God to bring some sense of restoration, some sense of hope, some sense of His presence, and He was good and answered those prayers, and I began to
Mm.
to almost physically feel the love and the goodness of God poured out on me. And it's super restorative for me. Probably
Mm,
the foundation for a lot of stuff that happened afterwards.
mm. Wow. Yeah. So you're, it sounds like you were really just like experiencing more hope, um and and lots of support from
Yes.
your pastor and everyone who loves you. Um so what was next?
Um, so after I was released from the hospital, I have several sons who live out of state, and they had, of course, my wife had called them and let them know that I had attempted suicide again,
Hmm.
and that it hadn't worked, and that I was in the hospital, and so I started having these difficult conversations like right away
How
because
old were your sons at that time?
25 and 19.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have a 17-year-old that's in the house, so I had a conversation with him as well.
Mm, mhm.
My daughter is 19, but she's special needs and is about 8-year-old mentally. So I still haven't talked to her about it because she just doesn't understand.
I see. Mhm.
Um, but I started having these conversations with my family, and my one son in particular was really, he expressed a lot of anger and a lot of hurt toward me, like
Mm,
how he's like, I thought you were stronger than this. I don't understand how you could do this to me. How could you do this to your mom? How could you do this to the family?
mm,
I deal with depression, but I never seriously considered suicide. How could you do that? And I didn't have answers for him.
wow.
I all I could do was tell him my story. This is what I felt. That this is my experience in the moment. This is why I took the meds that I did. This is what's happened since.
Mm,
This is where I'm at right now. And I hope that we can, begin to rebuild some sort of trust. And he had said to me, you know, you've you've attempted to commit suicide one time in each of the last 2 years. I need to see you make it a year before I'll be able to take you serious.
mm,
And you know, that was that was hard, but I kind of earned that,
mm,
if I'm being honest, because
mm,
of the choices that I made. I earned that. And there
mm,
were a couple times that had suicidal ideations, even outside of the two attempts that I had. Um, so there was a cycle there that needed to be broken. So
a brave thing to for a son to say to a father.
yeah, yeah,
Like he was telling you what he needed to
yeah.
trust you. Um, yeah. Uh, hard for you to hear, but motivating. Part
It,
of the things that.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to say I'm about 18 months out from my last suicide attempt. And I feel pretty stable. I feel like I'm in a good place, probably better than I've been in a very long time.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. What what role has writing and blogging played in your mental health?
Oh boy, it's been huge. There are some people who are verbal processors. I process through writing. So sometimes I don't know what I'm thinking until I write about it.
Huh.
So some part of it has just been personal journaling that no one else will ever see because it's just too personal, and it's too, I want to own that myself.
Mm,
But a lot of the writing that I do, it does end up on my website, or it does end up, some version of it ends up on social media somewhere. Um, it's been helpful for me as well to to really transition, kind of, as I continue to find healing, to be that wounded healer. And I have interactions with people because of some of the writing that I do, or they'll say, hey, I really connected with XYZ. How did you get through that? And I have the privilege of sharing some of my story
Mhm.
and of being able to offer hope to someone in real concrete ways. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. The uh with writing with your words, but you're also doing reels uh on is it Instagram or TikTok? um
Instagram, yeah.
in Instagram. So you're doing the short videos. Those are you're usually short. How do you decide what becomes a reel versus what's written?
That's a good question. So it's really tricky because all the quote experts say that a reel should be 12 to 15 seconds for the algorithms to pick up on it and for other people to sort of even realize that you've done this reel.
Hmm.
So for me, it sort of comes down to what can I break down into that short of a timeline, and then have like a mini blog post underneath it to sort of describe more. That timeline is really hard for me. I feel like I can't say like I joke I'm not very active on Twitter because I can't say anything in 280 characters. And it feels like that same sort of pressure of, boy, I have
Mhm.
to say something in this super short period of time
Mhm.
that is going to be compelling enough for someone to want to bother to read the mini blog post that I write underneath it.
Mhm. I see. Yeah. Um, the I I I've noticed that the more you do stuff, the hopefully like the better you get. Um, uh,
Mhm.
it it is what do you like to do for fun, Chris?
Ooh. Honestly, I'm a bit of a TV and movie buff. I know that sounds lame, but
Oh,
anything
not
that's
not at all. Not like I
okay.
I'm a fellow movies more than TV. I have trouble sticking with series. Uh
Yeah.
but yeah, but that's something you enjoy
Yeah,
for
definitely.
self-care. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um the with so you mentioned folks are reaching out to you and um, resonating with your writing, and that you're also have are doing some speaking. Can you tell me a little bit about that too?
Sure. So in today's COVID world, it's a little different. Pre 2019, I was somewhat regularly speaking at different uh, uh, like Christian college chapels
Mm,
or at writers conferences or other conferences,
mm,
speaking on mental health issues. Um, now that looks a lot more like there's an online summit that's talking about XYZ, and we're all gonna, we're so it looks a lot more like you and I having this conversation. It's because I'm basically recording my session ahead of time, and then people will view it whenever it's released for the summit.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, uh do you think are the main things that you want uh your audience to know? What do you want to teach and share with them?
One of one of the big things that I talk a lot about is this the same idea that my pastor shared with me. Hey, God's not done with you guys.
Mm,
There isn't a diagnosis, there isn't a health condition, there isn't a circumstance that's going to cause God to nope out on you, to
mm,
say, hey, you are too messed up for me to even have any interest in. That's one of the big things. And
mm,
then there's some misconceptions that people of faith have about mental illness. There, an example of that would be, scripture talks about worry being a sin. So there's a whole host of people that I interact with that have clinical anxiety. where they're taking a Xanax when they have a panic attack or something like that,
mm,
and they feel like every time they have one of those that they're walking into a pattern of sin. So I talk a
mm,
lot about,
mm,
hey, there's a distinction between worry and clinical anxiety. Hey, there's a distinction between depression and not having faith. Like there's I'm obviously not a psychiatrist. I'm obviously not a counselor, but I still have this lived experience where I can say, hey, there are mental health care diagnoses that have a lot more in common with I'm a diabetic than they have in common with I'm a murderer. So let's not get confused here,
mm.
because
Yeah.
so many people get tripped up on that. And I spent a lot of time talking around those ideas.
Mm, yeah. I didn't ask this earlier, but I want to ask it now. You were taught that anti-medication, like um, you don't need it, or it's wrong to go there. What was it that helped you gave you permission or freedom to try that with your doctor?
So part of it was just the little church that we were involved in definitely had sort of uh, cultic controlling tendencies.
Mm,
So breaking the ties with that group sort of brought us as a family to a place of, hey, let's question all of these things that we were taught, and
mm,
let's sort of individually look at all of these things and say, hey, do these, number one, make sense? Do these, number two, have any sense of truth from scripture? And number three, are they putting unnecessary burdens on our life? So it started this whole reevaluation of our lives in everything from financial to healthcare to the way that we interacted with and raised our children. Like those are three key areas that we reevaluated and dramatically changed after leaving this almost cult like church that we were in.
mm. I see. Yeah. The it it gave you a chance to try different things, and
Absolutely.
and eventually get the help you needed. Um, wow. Uh, Chris, w- the ECT helped, and the treatment helped. Your pastor's support, and even your conversations with your sons helped. What's what's different about your life now than 18 months ago? Like, what changes have you made in your life to be emotionally healthier?
So one thing that I do is I have a very specific morning routine where that includes some meditation, that it includes there's a very short podcast that it's like a 5-minute podcast that I listen to every morning. I
Hmm,
do a little bit of scripture reading. Um, uh, I do a little bit of journaling, and these things sort of, they start my day off on the same right healthy path.
mm,
So that's one major thing I've done that I've
mhm,
added to my life that is really
mhm.
helpful. Um,
Like mentally and emotionally or spiritually, like path.
Kind of all of them, yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm,
Um,
mhm,
because with the podcast that I listen to is Mary DeMuse's Pray Every Day.
mm,
So she just reads some scripture and then prays through it. So it sort of connects me to God in the very beginning of my day, along with reading a chapter in scripture, and then the
mm,
journaling helps me sort of, like I'm forcing myself to be a lot more transparent with myself about the things that I'm feeling. Um,
mm.
let me explain what I mean by that.
Okay.
With both of my suicide attempts, in the moment, I felt like they came out of nowhere. I had no warning. There was there was no way for me to be prepared for them because they
Mm.
came out of the blue sky.
You're just
I
blindsided
could,
by it.
yeah, but that wasn't true at all.
Mm,
I had been cycling downward for a while, and I'd been ignoring it because I
mm,
was ashamed of it,
okay.
and I was feeling, and I didn't want to deal with the guilt associated with it. So I pretended like it wasn't there.
Mm.
So another thing I do that's very different now is at at the first glimpse of feeling those depressive thoughts starting to overwhelm me, I I address them myself, and I let there's about 4 or 5 people in my life. I let them know, hey, I'm having a really hard time with depression right now.
Mm.
And so there's some accountability that's built in there. I've broken that shame cycle that's associated with depression as well.
Mm.
Um, I view it as something that I just have to deal with, as opposed to, some grand sin that's in my life, or something that that creates a separation between me and God.
Mm. I,
Um,
l- I like that distinction, Chris. That shame is different than depression, and like depression is hard enough by itself. Um, but then when you add shame on top of that, it's just it's crushing. Um, so I like how you're separating that and um and healing from shame. Um, I it's interesting that uh your pastors were emphasizing like faith and trusting God, and I think some folks that are maybe kind of in that uh that culture, or it kind of have that perspective um about scripture and dealing with depression. They they they, they might think like, oh, people that go to counseling that's not biblical counseling, or take medications, they're like, just trying to save themselves and do this
mhm.
in their own effort. But you circle back to, you're still praying and listening to scripture and reading scripture. It's still important. um it you're not saying that like those things aren't helpful. They're very helpful. That's how you're starting the day. um but it's not uh it's not the only thing. Like, if we could
I
only find the sin pattern, the hidden sin, then everything would be okay.
I think that's part of what I learned, is that for me, my depression is this multifaceted thing that comes from so many different places. Some part of it is my childhood trauma. Some part of it is just kind of grooves in my brain that needed to be rewired.
Mm.
Some part of it is bad habits. Some part of it is me not making a daily connection with God. Some part of it was me not being vulnerable in the way that I lived my life. And that's 5 completely different things that each contributes rather to my depression. And I have to be aware of and sort of tracking all of those things to stay in a good place.
Mm. Nice. I'm glad you've found uh some really key things that help you manage that. um do you feel like depression is behind you, or is it something that you're just you're gonna have to continue to contend with and deal with?
I'm I'm pretty sure, unfortunately, that it's something I'm going to have to continue to deal with.
Mm.
It's because there are, even in the last couple of months, there have been moments where I've started to feel that overwhelm again. But now I have some tools to be able to combat that, rather than feeling so much anxiety and so much stress and so much helplessness in the face of that overwhelm.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. The w- w- what are you hoping for this year? And anything on the horizon with speaking or writing?
My agent has a book out for submission that is sort of related to it. It's a devotional book, but it is definitely kind of aiming at the mental health community. So I'm hoping that we find someone who picks that up. I'd love to get a book traditionally published out there. I think the
Nice.
opportunities are just, you never know what'll happen when you have a publisher behind you.
Yeah, nice. Can you share the title yet, or you have to wait? Do we have to wait?
We'll have to wait.
Okay.
The title could
Okay.
change anyway.
Oh yes, I see. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exciting. Yeah. Um, as we wind down our time, Chris, thank you again for coming on. It's been so good to talk with you. Um, and any last thoughts that you'd like to share with listeners?
Um, I think the biggest thing that I'd like to share for those that are listening is just a reminder that we are all in process, and we all have our ups and downs, and there's this really common perspective on God that gets us trapped. It's like God is a get your God, like he's just waiting for us to screw up so he can zap us with lightning.
Hmm.
And that's just, gosh, that's not the God we actually see in Scripture, especially in the New Testament.
Hmm.
I just want to encourage people to move into a place of remembering the profound love that God has for us,
Hmm.
that is not dependent on anything we do or don't do.
Hmm.
I think that'd be a good thought to sort of end with.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Chris. Um, uh, how can listeners stay connected with you, learn more about you, and watch some of your reels?
Oh, sure. So my website is Chris Morris Writes with a W, chrismorriswrites.com. And that's where you'll find my longer blog posts. My Instagram handle is at Chris Morris Writes. That's where I'm most active. And then if you can find me on Facebook, with search for Chris Morris Writer, and you'll find me there. To be honest with you, most of the stuff that flows through onto my Facebook profile is stuff that comes from Instagram. So you may as well just stay with Instagram and sort of find me there.
Hmm. Yeah, great. All right. Thank you, Chris. I hope the the book finds a home with a publisher. Look forward to reading it someday.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thank
I'll
you.
see ya.
All right.